The rain fell against the tall windows of Highgrove House, tracing lazy paths down the glass as the gray English morning did its best to intrude upon the silence of the study. King Charles III stood with his back to the door, his posture rigid as he stared out at the dripping hedges of the garden he had so lovingly cultivated for decades. In his hand, he held a piece of paper so old that it threatened to tear at its own folds. The ink faded to a dusty blue. It had been hidden for over 25 years, tucked away in a compartment of a jewelry box that had once belonged to his late ex-wife, Princess Diana. The discovery had been an accident, a cruel twist of fate orchestrated by an overzealous palace aide tasked with cataloging items for a forthcoming historical exhibition. The box said a beautiful but unassuming mahogany chest inlaid with mother-of-pearl, had sat in the royal archives for decades, its presence noted but its secrets respected. No one had dared to truly search it. But when the aide had lifted the velvet-lined tray that held a string of pearls, a spring mechanism he had unknowingly triggered released a false bottom. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded blue silk, lay a single envelope and a small bundle of audio cassettes, bound with a rubber band that snapped the moment it was touched. The king had been summoned immediately. As he read the letter for the first time, his knuckles turned white. It was dated October 1995. He recognized the handwriting instantly, the loopy, dramatic slant of his late wife's penmanship. But it was the words that froze the blood in his veins. It was a note that detailed her fears, on her paranoia, and a prediction so specific that it made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "My husband is planning an accident in my car," she had written, "brake failure and serious head injury." This was not news to him in the context of public record. He had been questioned about that very note years ago by police. But seeing it in her own hand, knowing it had been sitting here, hidden, for all these years while he had moved on, married Camilla and taken the throne, felt like a physical blow. It was a ghost leaping out of the past, demanding an audience. The note was accompanied by a shorter, typewritten letter from Diana's mother, Frances Shand Kidd, addressed to "my darling boys, William and Harry," explaining that if they were reading this, it meant their mother had instructed her to hide it here, and that they should listen to the tapes to understand the truth. Charles sank into the leather chair behind his desk, the note trembling in his hand. The weight of the moment was not just in the accusation, but in the timing. The boys, his sons, were men now. They had their own families, their own traumas, their own carefully constructed narratives of their mother's life and death. Did this change anything? Did it reveal anything new? He looked at the tapes. They were small, the kind used for dictation. He didn't want to listen to them. He was terrified of what they might contain, but he knew he couldn't destroy them. The truth, no matter how painful, belonged to William and Harry. Taking a deep breath that shuddered in his chest, he reached for the phone. He needed his sons to come home. An hour later, the atmosphere in the study had shifted from solitary grief to a tense, coiled anticipation. Prince William had arrived first, striding into the room with the easy confidence of a man who had grown up in these halls but carried the weight of the future king on his shoulders. He had immediately noticed the pallor of his father's face and the box sitting on the desk like a bomb waiting to detonate. Prince Harry arrived shortly after, his arrival announced by the stomping of boots in the hallway and the closing of a heavy door. Since moving to California, his visits were infrequent, and the air in the room always seemed to change when he entered, charged with a mixture of love and the unspoken tension of family rifts. "What's going on, Pa?" Harry asked, his tone guarded as he shrugged off his jacket and threw it over a chair. Then he glanced at William, who gave a slight shake of the head, indicating he was as much in the dark as his brother. Charles didn't speak at first. He simply gestured to the box. "Your mother's jewelry box, the one from Kensington Palace. We found a compartment we never knew existed. William stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the box. He reached out and touched the wood as if expecting it to be warm. What was in it? A letter. From your grandmother, Frances. And tapes. Audio tapes your mother recorded. The room went silent. Harry moved closer, his initial defensiveness replaced by a sharp, almost painful curiosity. Tapes of what? Charles handed the letter to William. As the two brothers leaned in to read the words of their late grandmother, the color drained from William's face, while Harry's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching violently. The letter spoke of their mother's fear in the mid-90s, her feeling that the walls were closing in. It explained that Diana had given the tapes to her own mother for safekeeping, with strict instructions. If anything ever happened to her, Frances was to ensure the tapes were hidden somewhere safe, somewhere they would eventually be found by her boys when they were old enough to understand. Frances, heartbroken and struggling with her own grief after Diana's death, had done exactly that, placing them in the box just months before she herself passed away in 2004. She had taken the secret to her grave, trusting that fate would reunite the tapes with her grandsons. This is heavy," Harry whispered, his voice rough. He looked at the small stack of cassettes. Have you listened to them?" Charles shook his head. "No. They are not for me. They were left for you." William looked from the tapes to his father. There was a deep, complicated history in that look. He remembered being 15, walking behind his mother's coffin. He remembered the years of silence, the investigations, the conspiracy theories. "We need to do this together," he said firmly. It was not a suggestion. Harry nodded, though his eyes betrayed a storm of emotions, grief, anger, and a desperate longing to hear his mother's voice again. Charles stood up, feeling like an intruder in his own study. "I will leave you to it. I am here if you need me." He walked to the door, pausing for a moment to look back at his two sons, the heirs to his legacy and the keepers of their mother's flame. Then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him, leaving William and Harry alone with the ghost of Diana, Princess of Wales. The first tape was scratchy, the sound of rustling fabric and a distant traffic hum giving way to a soft, familiar voice that made both brothers freeze. It was unmistakably her, the gentle lilt, the slight breathiness, the laugh that sounded like a bell. "It's October, 1995. Diana's voice crackled through the small speaker of an old cassette player Harry had found in a drawer. "I'm sitting here, and I feel like the world is closing in on me. I have to record this because I don't think anyone would believe me if I just wrote it down." William sat on the edge of the desk, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, a barrier against the emotional assault. Harry sat on the floor, his back against the bookcase, knees drawn up, and eyes fixed on the spinning reels of the tape deck. They listened as their mother spoke not as the people's princess of lore, but as a woman unraveling. She spoke of the divorce, of the rejection by the institution she had married into. But then the tape shifted. She talked about a meeting with a journalist, a man from the BBC named Martin Bashir. Her voice became more animated, tinged with a desperate need to be believed. "He showed me things, William. Harry, if you're listening. He showed me bank statements. Proof that people close to me were being paid to watch me, to report back. He said my security wasn't safe. He said there were people who wanted me gone." She paused, and the sound of her sipping a drink was unnervingly loud. "I felt so alone, so trapped. He said I could tell my side. That the world needed to know." Harry looked at William. This was the infamous Panorama interview, the interview that had blown their family apart, the interview that William had recently spoken out about, blaming the BBC for their mother's paranoia. To hear her describe the manipulation in her own words was devastating. "He was feeding her this stuff," Harry hissed. He was making her scared for her life. William held up a hand, shushing him. Diana was talking again. I wrote a note. I wrote it to Paul Burrell. I told him that I was scared, that Charles, that their father, that he was planning an accident. I know how that sounds. It sounds mad. But after everything Bashir showed me, I don't know who to trust. I have to protect myself. I have to protect my boys. The tape clicked off. The silence in the room was deafening. William ran a hand over his face, rubbing his eyes. The infamous note, the one that had led to police questioning his father, was not born of simple paranoia. It was born of a targeted campaign of deceit by a journalist who had played on her vulnerabilities and weaponized her fears. She wasn't crazy, William said quietly, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely showed. She was set up. They made her feel so unsafe that she started seeing threats everywhere, even from Pa. Harry shook his head, a single tear tracing a path through his beard. But that's the point, Willie. To her, the threat was real. That fear, that loneliness. She lived with that every single day because of what that man did, and no one stopped him. No one protected her. The second tape began with a lighter tone, but it was a deceptive calm before a more intimate storm. Diana was talking about her childhood, about the divorce of her own parents. I was 7 years old, her voice echoed in the darkening room. I remember standing at the door watching my father slap my mother. I hid. I always hid. You learn that early, don't you? That when things get bad, you find a corner and you make yourself small. She spoke of the custody battles, the feeling of being a nuisance, a pawn shuffled between houses. She recounted the pain of learning she had an older brother, John, who had died as a baby, a son their parents desperately wanted, making her arrival as another daughter feel like a disappointment. I think I spent my whole life trying to prove I was worthy of being held, she said softly. The brothers listened, transfixed. Then they had known their mother's childhood was unhappy, but hearing her dissect it with such raw, adult clarity was like watching a surgeon operate on her own heart. She connected the dots for them in a way no biography ever could. When I married your father, I wanted that family so badly. I wanted the arms around me. I wanted the stability. But I brought all that damage with me. I brought the fear of being left, and he brought his own world. We were oil and water, but we were also two people who never learned how to just hold on to each other. This context reframed everything. Her bulimia, her emotional outbursts, her desperate need for public adoration. It was all rooted in that 7-year-old girl hiding behind a door, listening to her parents shatter. William thought of his own children, of the safe and loving home he and Catherine were trying to build. He understood, with a chilling clarity, the legacy of trauma. He looked at Harry, who had spoken so openly about his own mental health struggles. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Their mother's pain had, in some ways, become their own. She was broken, Harry whispered, and instead of helping her, the world just kept breaking her. Diana's voice continued, speaking of her time with the royal family. She didn't just blame Charles, she spoke of the system, the men in gray suits, the frosty formality of Sandringham, the loneliness of Kensington Palace. It's a gilded cage, she said, and the bars are made of duty and protocol. No one asks if you're okay. They just ask if you've signed the guest list. The third and fourth tapes delved into the heart of the marriage and the affairs, both hers and Charles's. It was painful listening. She spoke of Camilla not with the venom the tabloids had reported, but with a bewildered sadness. I don't understand what she has that I don't, she mused on one tape. Is it just history? Is it just that he knew her first? I tried so hard. I gave him an heir and a spare, as they say, and still I wasn't enough. She acknowledged her own affair with James Hewitt, but the context she provided was one of profound loneliness. He was kind to me, she said of Hewitt. He made me feel seen. When you've been invisible for so long, when the person who is supposed to love you looks right through you, anyone who actually looks at you feels like a lifeline. Like, I know it was wrong, I know it hurt people, but I was drowning. Harry flinched at the mention of Hewitt. The rumors about his paternity, the cruel jokes, the constant speculation. He had written about the pain it caused him. But to hear his mother speak of the man as a lifeline was a complex revelation. It didn't excuse the affair, but it explained the desperate state of mind that led to it. She wasn't a scheming woman trying to hurt the monarchy. She was a lonely woman trying to stay afloat. She also spoke of her sons with an aching love that cut through the sadness. On the fourth tape, her voice brightened considerably. "William is so serious," she laughed. "He watches everything. He's going to be a wonderful king one day because he actually cares about people. He watches his father. He watches me. And I can see him filing it all away, trying to figure out how to do it differently. And Harry. Oh, my Harry. He's all light. He's all the joy I have left. He bounces through life and he makes me remember how to laugh. I worry about him, though. I worry the world will be too hard for a heart as soft as his." Hearing this, Harry broke. The tears he had been holding back spilled over, and he buried his face in his hands. William moved from the desk, sliding down to sit on the floor next to his brother. He didn't say anything. He just put an arm around his shoulders, and they sat there, two middle-aged men, sons of the king, weeping quietly for the mother who had seen them so clearly and who had been taken from them so cruelly. The final tapes were the hardest. They were recorded in the summer of 1997, just weeks before her death. And the tone was different. The paranoia was gone, replaced by a fragile, tentative hope. She spoke of a man named Hasnat Khan, a heart surgeon she had been seeing. "He treats me like a normal person," she said, wonder in her voice. "He doesn't care about the title. He just cares about me. I think I could have a life, a real, quiet life, away from all of this." This was a revelation. The world had always linked her with Dodi Fayed, assuming they were a serious item. But here she spoke of Dodi almost as a footnote, a summer distraction, a friend. Her heart, she said, belonged to Hasnat. She spoke of wanting to move to America for a while, or to Australia, somewhere she could give William and Harry a break from the relentless press attention. "I want to cook for them," she laughed. "Can you imagine? Me, in a kitchen? Oh, I want to pick them up from school without a photographer in the bushes." But then, on the very last tape, the shadow returned. It wasn't the same as the 1995 paranoia. It was something else. A premonition. "I had a dream last night," she said softly. "I was in a tunnel, a long, dark tunnel, and there were lights, blinding lights, and I couldn't see the boys. I was calling for them, but they couldn't hear me. I woke up in such a state. I know it's silly, just a dream, but it felt so real." Harry and William looked at each other, the hairs on their arms standing up. The tunnel. The Alma tunnel. The place where their mother had drawn her last breath. "It's just a dream, Mummy," William whispered to the recording, as if he could reach through time and comfort her. The tape continued. "I've made arrangements," Diana said, and her voice firmer now. "Just in case. I'm not being morbid, I'm being practical. I've left these tapes with my mother. I've told her if anything happens to me, make sure the boys get these. I want them to know I didn't leave them by choice. I want them to know I was fighting. I want them to know how much I loved them. Every second of every day I loved them. They were the only thing I ever got right." The tape clicked off. The player fell silent. The room was dark now, the gray afternoon having surrendered to a deep, starless night. Neither brother moved for a long time. They had spent hours in the company of their mother, and they felt drained, emptied, but also strangely fuller, as if pieces of a puzzle they didn't know they were solving had finally clicked into place. The door opened softly. King Charles stood there, his face etched with concern. He had given them hours. He couldn't stay away any longer. He looked at his sons sitting on the floor, their faces stained with tears, an old tape deck between them. He didn't ask what they had heard. He could see it in their eyes. William was the first to speak. His voice was hoarse, but steady. She wasn't well, Pa. Not just sad. They made her sick with fear. Bashir, he poisoned her mind. Harry looked up at his father, and for the first time in years, there was no anger in his gaze, only a deep, profound exhaustion. She loved us. She loved us so much. Charles stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He walked over and stood before them, a man who had often been accused of being cold and distant, now struggling to find the right words. "I know," he said quietly, his own eyes glistening. "That whatever happened between us, whatever our faults, we both loved you. That was the one thing we never doubted." He reached down, offering a hand to each of them. William took it, pulling himself up. Harry hesitated for just a second, a lifetime of hurt flashing across his features, before he grasped his father's hand and let himself be pulled to his feet. They stood there, the three of them, in a triangle of shared grief and complicated history. The tapes lay silent on the desk. The secrets of the box were now theirs to carry. "So what do we do with them?" Harry asked, looking at the cassettes. William looked at his father. It was a constitutional question, a personal one, a historical one. Charles took a deep breath. "They are yours. They were always meant for you. You can lock them away, destroy them, or release them to a museum one day. That choice is yours and yours alone. But whatever you decide, you do it together. That is what she would have wanted. Her boys. Together." William looked at Harry. Harry gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Then we keep them," William said, his voice carrying the weight of a king in waiting. "For now. For us. And when the time is right, when our children are old enough to understand, we will let them hear their grandmother's voice. So they know she was real, so they know she was human, so they know she loved them, even though she never got to meet them." Harry picked up the tapes, holding them carefully, reverently. It was the closest thing to a hug from his mother he would ever get. The box that had held the crown jewels of Diana's secrets was finally empty. But the hearts of the men she left behind were, for the first time in decades, full of the unvarnished, painful, beautiful truth